Welcome everybody to our webinar today.
Thank you for joining us today. We're delighted to be sharing this presentation with you on a webinar. It follows on from two in-person parent events the Haringey Language and Autism team held in the autumn term, discussing the same topic, discussing autistic identity with your child. Both of these in-person events were really successful and well received. So we're really happy to be sharing the resources and ideas with you again today. So this is the Haringey Language and Autism team. We're an advisory service and we work in mainstream, primary and secondary schools and sixth form colleges in Haringey. I'm one of the autism support teachers in the team and I'm joined on the webinar with one of my colleagues, Peter Griffiths.
Hello, I'm Peter Griffiths and I am also one of the teachers from the team.
So the plan for this webinar, today we're thinking about how we can support children to understand more about themselves, so their identity, a bit more about their strengths and what brings them happiness and joy, as well as thinking about any support needs they may have and how we can support this journey of understanding their identity and what it means to them. We'll be sharing information and some resources and ideas with you to guide you on your journey. So this is one parent's perspective. In my opinion, diagnosis is not about labelling, it's about embarking on a journey to knowledge and the chance to make life that much easier for the child with autism. So we think the word journey is really important here because there might be some of you who are just at the beginning of your journey. Perhaps your child has just received a diagnosis, or some of you have the diagnosis, but you haven't yet talked to your child or young person about it. Or perhaps you're further along and your child already knows more about their identity and that there's actually more to explore and think about being autistic. Or maybe they're coming up to a key transition point from primary to secondary school, and you want your child to have a greater understanding of their strengths and needs before they get there. So it's important to consider that learning about identity is an ongoing process and it never stops. This is the beginning of an ongoing process. Everyone is on their own journey. So like everybody, we all change and develop at different rates. We all carry on learning about ourselves. And learning about being autistic and what it means is an ongoing process too, as our children are transitioning through the school years to secondary school, college, and into the workplace and beyond. And the second point here is taken from the Autistic Girls Network, who have lots of information on their website. An important consideration they highlight, and the first step before thinking about talking to your child about being autistic, is to address your own views so that you don't pass on any worries to your child. We acknowledge every parent has worries about their children, with or without a diagnosis, but in particular post a diagnosis. And if your child has been recently diagnosed, it can take some time to process that information. So we were lucky enough to have a parent join us at our in-person event in November, and they spoke about their experience of sharing autistic identity with their child. So the parent told us that she'd had many worries about sharing the diagnosis. But afterwards, perhaps a week or so later, she checked in with them to find out how her child was, if they thought about their diagnosis anymore or if they had any questions. And her child said to her, "Why are you asking me this? Should I be worried?" And she realised she hadn't actually considered her child may still be processing the information or maybe thinking about being autistic in a different way. So for her child, life had just carried on and they were carrying on thinking about their interests their gaming, Lego, and about their friends, and in fact, not about their autistic identity when she checked in with them a week later. And she also told us that her child had had lessons at school and an assembly about neurodiversity, and there was an inclusion week at her child's school. So understanding that difference wasn't actually as new or wasn't news, the news to them as she had imagined. So this is Raylene Dundon, and a quote here from her book, Talking with Your Child About Their Autism Diagnosis. Raylene is a mother of 2 autistic children, and she says, your feelings about your child's diagnosis can change. However, while it helps to know others can relate to experiences, it's important to remember that your journey is specific to you, and no one can tell you what you should or shouldn't be feeling. So Raylene's book includes some case studies and examples and resources that might be able to equip you to make your own informed choices. And she also gives some advice on what to do if a child or young person should react in a negative or unexpected way. But really what the important thing is that it's your journey, it's specific to you, and no one can tell you how to do things.
Okay, so we're going to hear from Kieran Rose. And Kieran Rose is the autistic advocate, and he shares his experiences of being an autistic person and a professional. And he has some collective stories reflecting on the barriers that face autistic people, addressing some of the negative narrative, that is often expressed in society. And he has many podcasts. And what he really wants to sort of for us to think about is positive, sustainable change.
My final question.
A positive, sustainable change towards better lives for autistic people. And he's going to share with us some advice now from this video.
My final question is, if you could give advice to the parents and teachers of newly diagnosed autistic children, what advice would you give them?
My advice would be, I guess more for parents, but this then relates to teachers as well, is that you want your little person to like themselves. You want them to self-accept. You want them to be strong advocates for themselves in whatever way that they can be, and you want the best for them. And the only way that they can do that is that if you use positive language around them, you encourage them to see the best in themselves, and you help them understand what's happening in their life. And for lots of autistic children, lots of autistic children aren't told that they're autistic, firstly. Lots of autistic children are told that they're autistic, and it's never adequately explained to them what that means for them. And then services around them are kind of trying very, very hard to fit all these children into boxes that they can't fit in, and kind of just squishing them in and pushing them down. So you need to reframe your mindset, and you need to think about this as not a problem to be fixed, but as actually something which can be really, really positive if you support it in the right way. And if you shuck off all this social rubbish that we have, that we indulge ourselves in all the time, all this fluff and guff, which is really, really pointless, and actually put your child at the heart of everything truly. So that would be my big bit of advice.
Thank you for that. And one.
So we hear from Kieran some really, really positive and really affirming advice. He shares that we want the little person to like themselves and to self-accept and to advocate for themselves, which also comes out in the Autism Understood website, which we'll be looking at in a moment. And we need to be thinking about using positive language and thinking about what's best for them, and help them to understand what's happening in their lives, and make sure that they're not thinking that being autistic is a problem to be fixed. And I think if we hold on to that key information, I think that's really, really important. So we would really recommend this website called Autism Understood. And this is linked to Spectrum Gaming, which is also another brilliant resource. And Spectrum Gaming are doing some brilliant work, particularly around children that are maybe not attending school. So this is a website about autism and for autistic young people. And this was developed to really sort of think about the building friendships, increasing self-acceptance and advocacy for autistic young people. And the information on the website is added by professionals, by parents, by autistic people themselves. And the young people review to check that it is affirming language and that it is affirming and understood by autistic young people. So, and what we know from the young people from a survey that was done of 100 young people by Spectrum Gaming, the link to Autism Understood. And these were the 5 top tips for autistic happiness. So to focus on your strengths, live your life in a way that works for you, know that accepting support is okay, and that it's okay to be yourself, and to learn about what it means to be autistic or about what autism is. So we can also see here some of the strengths that these young people highlighted about themselves. So really nice things written here. Problem solver, playful, no gamer rage, good connection with other autistic people, a huge focus on something that you enjoy or like, and creative. And you can see many more strengths that are written down here. So we also know from the NAS there is a section called Now I Know, and Melissa Simmons, who spoke at our conference a couple of years ago, she has a lovely video on Now I Know where she talks about how it really sort of helped her to understand herself, how she had very much felt like an outsider when she was young. So the more I learn about myself and about autism, the happier and more liberated and free that I feel. And she talks about what gives her joy. And one of those things that gives her joy is looking at cranes. And she says, I can't explain it, but I now acknowledge it. So also on the Autism Understood website, there is a really useful section which is about what it means to be autistic. And they have divided this up into 6 sections. So you can see here is 1, logical processing, sensory differences, executive functioning differences, and spiky profiles. And each of these sections has more detail underneath when you go into the section. And they also say that these differences are impacted by lack of understanding from society. And we also need to be aware that there is an autistic culture, and that many autistic people may carry out their relationships in a different way to non-autistic people. And you can see here that they talk about spiky profiles. And we really like the way they describe this as some things are easy for that young person and some things may be difficult. And what we need to be thinking about is that that some of the areas that are more difficult for the young person may mean that they would have higher support needs in those areas.
Okay, so in the last slide, we wanted to sort of highlight that area of difference, all the spiky profiles, because it brings us onto the understanding about the autism spectrum. And so like all people, autistic people have a wide range of strengths and support needs. So as an example, a spiky profile might mean that an autistic person could be a leading expert on nuclear physics, but they're not able to remember to brush their teeth or clean their clothes. And so this representation of the sliding scale is misleading, because we need to be thinking more about support needs, and not as thinking that autistic people are very autistic or mildly autistic, but unpicking more about those needs. So you might have heard about Jamie and the Lion, and Jamie's a senior research engineer who works at the BBC, and he's been speaking about his autistic life for some time in articles and podcasts. He's a very successful web developer in the workplace, but his support needs are that he experiences challenges in planning and self-care, and has carers who are with him for around 15 hours a week, who help him to cook, help with chores around the house, and help him to get through his daily routine. So if you'd like to find out more about Jamie, he tells his story on the National Autistic Society website. But when we think more about this scale, we think this linear line. It does assume every autistic person fits neatly onto this line, and that they're stuck in one place and not able to sort of move up or down the spectrum. But in fact, a different way of looking at the spectrum and spiky profiles is to use this colour wheel. And we have a visual here that shows the support needs around the edge of the wheel. So sensory needs, language and communication, motor skills, perception and executive functioning. So where the centre dot will represent less need, and people who need more support in certain areas, that dot would move towards the edge of the wheel. So in this case, our example shows someone with more sensory needs and more motor skill needs, because those two dots have moved away from that central circle. So I think also this imagery is actually relevant for all of us, and it can fluctuate depending on many variables. So if we're having a good day or not, if we're hungry or tired, if it's the end of term or coming up to Christmas, if we're feeling the stress of this, and so on. So in this respect, another way of looking at it is to imagine the imagery of a kaleidoscope and the kind of moving, changing colours as well. So we're going to watch a video from one of the autistic young experts, who now talks about some of her support needs and some of her strengths as well.
Hi, I'm Olivia, and today we're going to be talking about what it means to be autistic to us individually. For me personally, I am a deeply caring, empathetic, and positively sensitive individual. I am someone who is chatty and thrives in a quiet, structured and predictable environment, but someone who's very withdrawn and can become quite overwhelmed and non-speaking in loud and busy and unstructured environments. The ways that I might communicate may vary from what's perceived as the norm, but this is totally okay, because everyone communicates differently, and communication isn't always what we'd expect as just oral, verbal communication. Being autistic to me also means being someone who has an altered perception of our sensory world, and someone who is more sensitive to light and sound, who might wear headphones a lot more than you'd think would be socially acceptable. I might wear sunglasses inside a lot of the time. I dislike light touch, but I love deep pressure and hugs. I'm someone who might need those extra few seconds in a new or different environment to just communicate in a way that works for me. And someone's patience and time in that is so important to me, and so valuable, and makes me feel seen, and able to enter those situations that I might otherwise find really difficult. But this is what it means to be autistic to me, and every autistic person is unique. There's no one look to autism, not that autism in itself has a physical outward look. We're all individuals. There's no one singular image or description that an autistic person could meet and every individual could match. Don't forget, if you've liked watching this video, to click subscribe and check out our other videos on the channel. Thank you.
So we've picked out some things here from Olivia's video, and some of her sort of spiky profile, really. So in the video, she explains what it is to be autistic for her, and she thrives in a predictable environment. She's deeply sensitive and empathetic. She needs patience and might need a few extra seconds in a new or different environment. And she has an altered perception of the sensory world. So I think she talks quite a lot about her sensory needs and explains what can help. So wearing sunglasses a lot of the time, deep pressure, and wearing headphones quite a bit. And she also said she was chatty. So it may be helpful to talk to your child or young person about their spiky profile. So a bit more about their strengths, and unpicking a bit more about their needs as well as a starting point.
So we also wanted to draw your attention to some of the language around being autistic. And we have accessed some information from CapTap, which is the Community Against Prejudice Towards Autistic People. And one of the contributors to CapTap is Dr. Monique Botha. And some of the aims are really around respecting all skills and perspectives, listen to views and experiences of autistic people, and to learn and unlearn. So sometimes we might have learned things or heard things about being autistic which we now know are incorrect. And also the ethos of nothing about us without us. So really sort of thinking that any research now, or any research that is going to be identified as useful for autistic people, needs to include autistic people. And there is some information saying the way autistic people are spoken about should be decided by autistic people. So the guide has incorporated research and papers that found the language the majority of autistic people are comfortable with. And we know that the autistic community is not one unified voice. And so we would also always recommend that if the autistic person you're talking to expresses a particular preference for a specific language, then that should be respected. So we're going to hear from some autistic people themselves about what their perceptions of language and what they see is important.
What is the right language to describe autism?
Thanks, Laura. Of course, we should say that they have autism spectrum disorder.
I think that we should say that they have autism spectrum condition. Now, settle down everybody. Let's begin.
I think we should say they're on the autistic spectrum.
Well, I'm glad you got around to asking me.
"573 people took part in a survey to find out which term should be used. They were asked which term they liked the most. Autistic spectrum condition, autistic spectrum disorder. On the autistic spectrum, people least like the term autistic spectrum disorder. People most like the term autistic.
This result was extremely significant, but what does this really mean?
This means that if we were to repeat the survey 10,000 times, you'd get the same result on all but one occasion. And 9,999 is a lot of surveys, as indicated by each individual piece of creepypasta.
People who are not autistic do not have very strong opinions, whereas in people who are autistic have very strong opinions.
Anything that includes disorder suggests deficit rather than difference. We need a language that is more positive and less medicalised, which medics would be able to get on board with.
I really don't like autistic spectrum disorder. I'm not disordered, and neither is my son.
He or she is autistic or autism. It's not a disorder or condition. It's a way of being.
It is important to focus on difference, not disorder, without diminishing difficulties that these differences can create in society.
Just autism. Anything that implies my son has a disorder or condition isn't okay, because actually he isn't disordered and he doesn't have a condition. He's just my boy.
Just autistic. Let's lose the disorder. The stigma around ASD creates negative attention and isn't good.
Autism isn't an alternative word, but the right word.
Autistic people should be in charge of words about autism.
So we can see some information here in more detail around some of the surveys. So Autistic Not Weird in 2022 survey, that 91% preferred the term autistic person and rather than using person with autism. So we are trying to use person first language, so autistic person language. And you can see in the information, there's a link for this information which we can share, which is shared on the PowerPoint, giving examples of what to say instead when you're thinking of trying to avoid particular phrases. So things like disorder, then using autism or autistic person, and also things like high functioning and low functioning. These can actually be, again, very misleading. As Nicola said earlier, when we're not all the same all the time. So for some more academically able young people, it may be that they have challenges in particular areas. So we need to not think of people as high or low functioning, but you can see here talk about the specific needs for support or access or accommodations that need to be made. And really trying to think about translating the medical language into identity affirming language. And that will help us to really sort of move away from terms like disorder and show respect for the individual and really try to sort of help the sort of challenges that society can create for a lot of autistic people. And you can see more examples here. And as Olivia said in the video, there's no autistic look. and really moving away from words like suffering. And basically now it is that you are autistic and you might have some access needs or support needs.
So some other points from the Autistic Girls Network, which is an organisation that we use for information quite a lot in our training. It's really helpful, not just for autistic girls, but every autistic person. So in terms of telling your child that they're autistic, or explaining more about their identity, they felt it's really important to create a safe space, find that right space, that quiet space when you're ready to share the identity with your child or young person. And as Peter's just said, Autistic Girls Network also say to avoid those negative words such as disorder or struggles. To be open to any questions that might come up, even if you don't know the answers. So being able to start that journey together and look at different resources together as a family can be really helpful. And perhaps starting with simple things that they already know about their experience of the world. So picking up on maybe some of their support needs, which might be here this example around loud noises, or perhaps picking up other areas of strength as well can be helpful as a starting point. So thinking about our schools, so the schools that we go into every day, we're training all schools and all staff using the Autism Education Trust resources. Right now, we've nearly trained all of our primary schools and are getting around most of our secondary schools. So we feel that we're equipping our teachers and support staff with the most up-to-date information about what it's like to be autistic. And that includes lots about the language that Peter's just spoken about as well, and changing that language from a sort of deficit model and thinking about difference as well. Also, we're helping schools to roll out an Autism Identity and Me project, and training staff to be able to deliver this project in schools. We're providing consultation and modelling and guidance for staff, and giving schools appropriate resources so that they're really equipped with everything they need to talk to a young person about being autistic. And where we know schools have adults who our young people trust in schools, we feel it's important that our schools have that information and the appropriate resources so that young people can go to them at any time to ask questions. And if you want to know more about more information about that, please speak to the school. Perhaps get in contact with the school Senko to find out about more about it. So this is an example of the sort of resource that schools might be using and sharing with children in schools. So it's from the book by Rebecca Duffus, Autism, Identity and Me. And within that book is lots of information about sharing strengths and support needs, and unpicking more about identity in terms of interests and focus, thinking a little bit about sensory needs, communication needs, and emotions and energy levels as well. So all of our schools have copies of this book. A little bit more about our team. This is Artie and also John from the team. Our team runs two autistic youth clubs. Artie runs the youth club for 11 to 16-year-olds, which is an in-person youth club, and it's run weekly between 4 and 5. And it's a really great place, a safe space for autistic secondary school children to come and share their interests, to come and play games together. So if you'd like some more information, do contact us and we can send you our flyer and information for signing up. And also John runs our post-16 youth club, which is online. And it really brings young people together around their interests, around media and gaming. So it's called Gaming Connection. Again, if you're a young person might like to join up, please get in touch with us. And that's run every week on a Wednesday afternoon between 4 and 5. So we asked a couple of our attendees of the youth clubs how they feel about their diagnosis. And we thought we'd just share with you these quotes. So one young person says, I'm neither happy or sad about it. I'm glad I got it. They're talking about their diagnosis. I was relieved because I've always known there was something different that I couldn't help. And another young person, I'm pretty okay with it. I knew for a few years, but in recent years, I've really known about it. I guess I have a few things left to know. So we thought that was a good quote to include in terms of that journey that we've been talking about today. There's still so much that we're all learning about what it is to be autistic.
So we also wanted to signpost you to other resources, books and websites that you might find useful. So Nicola's referred to Raylene Dundon earlier, and here is her book. And she also states that before you start the process of talking to your child about their autism, it is important to consider your own thoughts and feelings about the diagnosis. And you can see as well that she talks about that sometimes a diagnosis may come as a relief and provide answers to many questions, and it may provide a level of understanding from others, often removing the burden of feeling like their child's behaviour is their fault. And of course, there are many parents who feel happy to finally know why their child is different, but they can also feel worried about what that future will bring for that young person. And whatever your reaction, the journey towards understanding is an ongoing one, as has been shared already by Nicola. And receiving a diagnosis for your child is only the beginning. And she also talks about being aware of your own feelings can assist you to choose a time that is right when you feel that you can communicate about autism in a positive and unemotional way. And she also talks about the fact that we're all on a different journey, and it is important to take time to process your child's diagnosis before you talk to them about it. And as Nicola shared earlier, there is resources at the back. There is things that we should be, ideas about how to go about it and ways to communicate and who, about telling other people as well. And as Nicola said earlier, there's case studies in the book too. And she does have a website as well. And I think she's now been diagnosed herself. And these are some recommendations that have come from parents. So Wonderfully Wired Brains is really very much about thinking about the science behind the fact that we all have different brains. And it also gives a sort of, very, very user-friendly view of how our brain operates and different parts of our brain and what they do. And this might be something that I know the parent that recommended this very much used this together, her and her child looking at it, as an activity together. And we really like The Secret Life of Rose. So autism means that your brain works differently than someone who isn't autistic. And even if someone else is autistic, your brain still works differently to theirs. And The Little Secret Life of Rose has many sections around emotions, sensory, and also it's very, very easy to understand. And you can see here, Jodie Smitten is Rose's mum, and she's got a brilliant website as well. And she has podcasts and webinars which you can buy at a very reasonable cost if there is a topic that you would like to find out more about. Sienna Castleton, it is a huge relief to know that my brain is just wired differently, which is why I find some things harder than neurotypicals and some things easier. This is again a book, particularly if your child is, key stage 2 or going into secondary, and again, each chapter is written on a theme and gives lots and lots of guidance around ways to sort of support yourself. And she also has a website as well, and things that can be, which outlines things that can be helpful. So Autistic Girls Network, which Nicola referred to earlier, and you can see Kathy Vassell, who runs Autistic Girls Network. You can see her book here, Nurturing Your Autistic Young Person. And she's got a YouTube channel as well where she interviews autistic people, and one where she talks herself about being autistic and what that means. And you can see a really good quote from her: "The message of cultivating a positive autistic identity in your young person is strong throughout, and all advice is given with the aim of helping young people to feel good about the things that make them unique and work out ways to make the world as safe and comfortable for them as possible." And we really like these visuals and information that was shared by NeuroWild. And you can buy these printed out on a website called, the name escapes me. Nicola, can you remember the name of the website? Is it Teachers? No, the website where you can buy them is something like
Teachers for Teachers.
Yeah, something like Teachers for Teachers. And you can see there is an example of helping the siblings, maybe. So when someone in your house is autistic, and you can see as well that she talks about the brain, and her visuals are really, really good. And you can follow her on social media as well, and she posts really useful tips about various issues. And we thought this was really important to mention as well. Hannah Gadsby, who's a comedian, and when she was on Woman's Hour in November, they were saying, "My goal is not so much to say, hey, my brain works differently, but to urge neurotypicals to perhaps engage in the way they think, because I don't think any brain thinks in the same way. And doing this will help us all to have more empathy for each other."
So this is the Spectrum Gaming Padlet. Peter mentioned Spectrum Gaming and Autism Understood, but on the Padlet there's a wealth of information in different areas that can be really helpful. So there's links to podcasts, academic papers, and everything's really helpfully sort of filed into different areas. So here's just a screenshot of one of their pages. So in terms of gaming, there's a paper on the benefits of gaming for autistic young people, how to talk to kids about video games, and lots of other information as well. Again, the Autistic Girls Network has a podcast library. So in the middle there at the top, 1800 Seconds on Autism is a great podcast to tune into. They have some very good guests. One of the speakers on there is Jamie and the Lion, who I mentioned earlier. Also autistic young experts. So we heard from Olivia earlier. As well as Olivia's video, there's lots of videos on their YouTube channel, the young people talking about what it's like to be autistic, to hear more about their autistic experience. And we find these videos really helpful for us as practitioners, but also for young people to hear from other young people about what it's like to be autistic. So some other books to signpost you to and other websites. Dr. Pookie Knightsmith has a great website and YouTube channel as well. Also Purple Ella. Both are speakers and advisors, and there's lots of videos on there, lots of content as well. Also to signpost you to other organisations that some of our parents have found useful. There's the Haringey Sendias support service, and also Markfield as well. Markfield runs holiday sessions, and they have a really big outdoor space where you can go with your child, and there's lots of advice there and drop-in sessions. So also opportunities to meet with educational psychology team from Haringey as well. So we really hope that you've enjoyed the webinar today, that you found the resources and ideas that we've shared with you helpful. We do run in-person events quite regularly, so please check the Haringey SEND local offer for more information. But our next in-person event is coming up quite soon on the 31st of March. We will be running a session at the Autism Hub, and if you would like to come along and meet other parents and also meet all of us from the Haringey Autism team, do please scan the QR code and come and join us on the 31st of March. Between 10 and 12. We'll be running a session with information similar to what we've shared today around sharing identity and diagnosis. But please do come along, and it's a great event so you can meet other parents there as well. Thank you for your time.